Well, over the last few decades, Vernon Gross has been one of the first phone calls after an aviation disaster. His job, figure out what happened and make sure it doesn't happen again. But Vernon says it's not just enough to avoid death. We need to make sure we are prepared for it.
Dr. Vernon Gross has spent the last 40 years advising organizations like Boeing and NASA how to avoid catastrophic events, such as plane crashes and terrorist attacks. This aviation authority says that while it's important to eliminate as many risks as possible, we should also actively prepare for death itself. In his new book, Death is Not Fatal, Dr. Gross asserts that as eternal beings, we need a better understanding of what the process of death really is.
Well, Vernon Gross is here with us now, and welcome. It's good to see you again.
It is, Pat, indeed.
You have revolutionized terror planning. What is your SMART system you figured out they use now to identify what the problems are? What is it?
Well, you know, really it's back to my work that I did with NASA from the beginning with von Braun.
Yeah.
I worked on all the space programs, you know, Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. And of course, I knew 10 of the 12 guys that walked on the moon.
Yeah.
People today don't even know we walked on the moon, I think.
Yeah.
It's ancient history of them.
Well, what is the SMART system? You have a system. How does it work?
And it takes a look at any subject. It could be anything.
Yeah.
But I looked at death as a system.
Okay.
With known inputs and desired outputs. That's as simple as I can say it. And so there's certain inputs that come into our life. There's certain outputs, and death can be viewed that way.
Well, now, let's break that down. I mean, you know, most of us say, hey, that's the time life stops, you know. But you say, really, your book is Death Isn't Fatal. What do you mean?
Well, the thing is that we have abandoned Judeo-Christian philosophy in our country rapidly.
Yeah.
And it's being replaced by secular humanism, which is a completely different philosophy. And of course, secular humanism is dominating, like political correctness comes out of secular humanism.
Yeah.
And it has on the input side nothingness and the outside nothingness. My medical doctor for 28 years.
Yeah.
And he teaches at Georgetown Medical Center in Washington, D.C. I asked him the other day, what's going to happen to you when you die? He says, I'm going to nothingness.
Your doctor said that?
Yeah,
I'm going
to
nothingness?
He's going to nothingness. And that's what is really understood by secular humanism.
They believe the input, there's nothing, and the output is nothing. And, well, that means just nihilism. There's nothing, there's no meaning for life or existence whatsoever.
And primarily, there's no accountability.
Oh,
see,
okay.
That's the key.
All right.
So you get away from it. What's the French Revolution faced that same way? When they wanted to deny Christ was raised from the dead, of course, in the French, they didn't want accountability. Because if he was raised from the dead, we would live after death. And so that's the thing.
And so you're saying, you know, if there's an airplane crash, there is something after death. But how pervasive is this nihilistic thinking? Has it pretty much gained ascendancy in the academic world?
It's unsaid in a way. It's there subtly, but it's there. And if you think about, for example, in my book, I make the point, everybody dies twice.
Okay.
You and I have both already died once. Galatians 2:20 says, I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. So I've died once. So dying twice, everybody's going to die twice. The second point of that is that there's known inputs and desired outputs of that.
All right.
If, in fact, you die, dying has to be done in the right order. So you have to not only die twice, but you got to die in the right order. We've died the right way first, because that takes care of our second death. Our funeral will be long, mine will be ahead of yours, but the thing is that, you know, we're going to have a funeral. But the fact is, there's death, and then there's second death.
But that's just for the Christian, though. The ungodly person doesn't have that, do they?
No, Hitler died too in the bunker in Berlin. So he died once, but he had his funeral. Or they had a funeral, I guess. I've been to that bunker when it happened. But the thing is now, Hitler will be raised again. In other words, we're created in Genesis in the image of God. God has no end of existence, and every human being that's ever lived has no end of their existence. That's something we're not even teaching in theology like we ought to.
No end of existence.
No end of existence.
So when you die, I die. If we're Christians, we will spend eternity with the Lord. But if we're not Christians, what happens?
There is a second death, talked about in the book of Revelation. Hitler will be resurrected, everybody will be resurrected, incidentally. Hitler will be resurrected, Mao, Stalin, and all these other scoundrels, they'll be resurrected too. But every believer will be resurrected. I have a diagram in my book that makes it simple for people. But in there, you'll see there's two resurrections. The righteous will be resurrected.
Yes.
The unregenerate will be resurrected.
And Hitler, Mao Zedong, Stalin, and those monsters, their resurrection will be to eternal torment. Is that what it is?
That's right. That's what the Scripture teaches.
That's pretty...
It will never end.
Well, now, the secular humanists do not want to face that fact.
Oh, obviously. So
what do they do? I mean, they have... Is it... antinomianism, they can do what they want to do, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die?
Well, there's actually authors I quote in my book who really make the point that they come from nothingness, they're going to nothingness. So they escalate man's importance, and man is everything. In fact, you know, I just found out yesterday, under Obamacare, there are now 70,000 reasons to die. They're coded. And every doctor or health administrator or anybody else has to select from 70,000 different reasons to die, and they have to put that in there or they won't get compensated for their work.
Wait a minute, 70,000 reasons?
70,000 reasons to die.
How could it possibly be?
Well, you know how we're the most overregulated society in history.
Yeah.
And so the regulators have gone in, and they're silly things like catching fire while you're water skiing is one reason to die.
Oh, come on. Catching fire while you're water skiing?
Right.
Come on, Vern. They don't say that.
That's
they're not
one
that,
of the codes.
They couldn't be that crazy.
They are that crazy.
Catching fire while you water ski?
Right. So,
all I do when I water ski is fall on my face in the water. I don't catch fire, I get wet.
Yeah. Well, that's the point I think that's got to be elevated and brought out, and that's why I wrote the book, is to get that out there, that death is the most important thing. If you take terrorism, for example, that's death. All it is unplanned death or sudden death or something like that. But aircraft crashes, I did 170 interviews on just TW-800 when it exploded over New York in '96. It's still being debated whether it was a terrorist act or it was a center wing tank.
Well, what was your conclusion on that, by the way?
Initially, for 2 years, I believed that it was a center wing tank because I'm a physicist by education.
Yeah.
And there could have been arc tracking if there'd been fuel in the tank, but there was no fuel in the tank. So it was hit by a missile.
Wait a minute, there was no fuel in the tank?
No.
Taken off? They just took off? There wasn't any fuel?
Well, in the center wing tank, there was no fuel.
That's
they
for sure.
bled this off. And I knew the captain that bled the tank. So there was no fuel and there was no way it could explode.
So it had to be a missile that shot it?
It was a missile, yes. And it's still, you know, a conspiracy, sort of like JFK conspiracy, but it's still out there, and I favor telling the truth.
Are you still working with the National Transportation Safety?
Well, I'm always on television. I've been on over 500 times, interviewed on disasters like that, including German wings. You know, when the pilot took it down in the Alps last year? Yeah. You know, they decimated the bodies. There was nothing bigger than a thimble but they put in there, they wanted to recover the bodies. See, they want closure. And incidentally, closure is a new term, part of secular humanism.
Closure?
Closure, yeah.
Why is that secular humanism?
Because they've invented that term to close out the idea of someone they knew or something and get over it.
Okay.
Because there's nothing beyond that. There's nothingness. So if you've known somebody and you loved them, and then maybe they're your relatives, they want to say they've gone to nothingness.
But you can't have closure if you believe in eternity, that there's no closure.
No, there is. There's accountability.
Where do you get this book?
Anywhere. You got it at Amazon or
Death
any of
is
the bookstores.
not fatal. Isn't that interesting? Man, it'll shred the secular humanists. I hope they get shredded. Vern, thank you so much. Our time is up, but God bless you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be with you again,
Thank you, my
Pat.
brother.